The photo he took went viral. That's Dr. Ethan Weiss on a packed United flight returning from New York in May after treating COVID patients. After his tweet, the airlines quickly made changes, but are they enough with air travelers now coming back? But first, a big announcement out of San Francisco today. Supervisor Shamann Walton says the city will be taking some money away from the police department and redirecting it to the African-American community. We're also going to talk with Alan Bluford. Her son, Alan Bluford, was shot and killed by an Oakland police officer when he was only 18 years old. It happened in 2012 during a foot chase. Now, police initially said Bluford was shot in an exchange of gunfire that also injured the officer, who later acknowledged that Bluford did not fire a gun and that the officer had shot his own foot. Protests followed that incident as well. Alan Bluford will be joining us in a little bit, but right now, Supervisor Shamann Walton is here with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristen.
Absolutely. Now, this idea of defunding police departments, it's a conversation being had across the nation in many big cities: New York, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, LA, and San Francisco. Tell me about the step that you and Mayor London Breed announced today.
So the mayor and I got together and announced actually last night that we are going to redirect resources from the San Francisco Police Department and invest in the Black community. When we look at all the work we've been trying to do for reparations and make sure that we address the systemic and systematic oppression of the Black community, this is an important, tangible, concrete step forward.
All right, so tell me how that is going to work, right? First of all, I think the police budget in the last round was over $600 million. How much money would you propose taking away, and which groups will it go to specifically?
So we're going to look at our entire SFPD budget. I'm going to work with my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors. We're going to work with the mayor's office. We're going to work with city leadership and really be thoughtful about where we look at resources and opportunities that may be available and redirect them to invest in the Black community. But we don't have the answer in terms of how much right now and exactly where we're going to put the resources from. But that is the focus, to make sure that we look at everything and do it appropriately. But it's going to take some time to figure that out.
All right. Will the public be weighing in this conversation of which groups should be getting the money?
We're going to be having conversations with leadership in the Black community. Obviously, we're going to bring in the Human Rights Commission, and we're going to make sure that voices are heard. We've been doing work around reparations and looking at the buckets of injustice that need to be addressed here in San Francisco. So whether it's housing, unemployment, education, outcomes, how we deal with affordability and getting the Black community out of poverty. All of those things are going to be at the table, and we're going to be pushing to make sure policy is affected in that manner.
Okay. And do you envision that money only going to groups that would serve the African-American community, or also perhaps the Latino or Asian communities that are also socioeconomically disadvantaged in the city of San Francisco?
Well, this focus, of course, is definitely specific to the Black community. However, my office is always working to make sure we do things that affect all communities of color. We worked on the Family Relief Fund to make sure that our undocumented immigrants and folks who didn't receive relief from the federal government or state government during the COVID-19 pandemic was able to get resources and make sure that tangible opportunities were available for those families. So we're always going to fight for all communities. This is specific to the Black population, but there is so much we're going to do for communities of color.
Now, you mentioned reparations, and you talked about the economic lack of opportunity for African Americans in this city as well. Give me some concrete numbers in terms of poverty and unemployment that would really show us and our audience who's watching just how deep that runs.
Well, if we look at even pre-COVID numbers, we were down in San Francisco about 3% in terms of unemployment, and it was about 15 to 20% in the Black community. So that just gives you a little bit of insight in terms of the disproportionate negative effects that we see in the Black community. And so everything we're going to do is going to be to positively impact change that makes sure that that dynamic doesn't exist anymore. And there are so many other negative percentages in terms of what's happening in our Black community, from the gaps in achievement, not just in unemployment, but promotions for jobs here in the Black community. also arrests, also incarceration. We're going to focus on making sure that we change all of those outcomes and do better for Black folks.
All right, Supervisor Walton, I'm going to bring into this conversation right now an ally you have in terms of defunding police budgets, and this is Alan Bluford. If you don't know her, you should. She's a mom, an African-American mom in Oakland who lost her son at the age of 18. You may not know her son Alan's name the way you know George Floyd's name, but you should. Geraldine, thanks for joining us. Belated condolences to you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I know this is not easy even now, even though it's been over 8 years. But, you know, even though the world knows George Floyd's name, most people outside of your Oakland community don't remember your son, Alan. So tell us about Alan, who he was, what he loved, and how his life came to an end.
Alan Dwayne Bluford was my 18-year-old son, born on December 20th, 1993. He was a senior at Skyline High School. He had a 3.0 grade point average. He loved sports. He was the all-American boy. 2 weeks before his graduation and right after he had gone to senior prom, he was with a couple of friends, another 18-year-old and a 15-year-old African-American who were watching the Floyd Mayweather fight in Oakland. The fight didn't last very long. Floyd knocked the guy out in one round, and they walked to the store. He was accosted by a police officer, Miguel Masso, with the lights turned off. He was supposedly on his way to a domestic violence call. He saw the 3 African-American males, jumped out without the lights. He threw one guy on the ground, one guy up against the fence, and my Alan ran. He commenced to running and chasing Alan like a madman. He was brandishing his weapon. Taking out his weapon, he shot himself in the foot. And to his admission and deposition, he said he blacked out because of the Iraq war. My Alan fell on the floor, on the ground. His last words was, as he was running, "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." Officer Masso went over the top of Alan with his leg bleeding and shot him 3 times center mass. Alan said, "Why did you shoot me?" We did everything that we could because they lied. They victimized Alan. They said that he shot Officer Masso, which was a complete lie. Officer Masso shot himself. I point to the fact that the city of Oakland, the first responders that was there on the scene, the police department came and they dismissed them. They brought in their own people. They washed up DNA. They got a story. They threatened witnesses. They had a young girl come up and say she saw Alan with the gun, which was not true. There was never any physical evidence. Right. The gun they had found was placed on the side of the fence, which had a partial left handprint, a partial left thumbprint. My Alan was right-handed. It was not his fingerprint at all. He had no gun residue, any of that. Yeah. They made up lies. They covered up. They did everything. I had to, with the help of the community and my personal attorneys, we got together, we did our own investigation. In our investigation, we found out that there was no gunpowder on Alan, that his hands were up when he was shot, that the stories that was told were not true, that Officer Masso shot himself, that they took Alan's body and put him in as an assumed name in the hospital, never notifying the family, never telling us anything. And when we went to get information from the police department, they kept us there in the waiting room for hours. They denied every fact. Again, cover-ups within the department, that blue shield. The Police Officers Association protected Officer Masso. Even the chief of police did not get to interview him. They kept him away from interview for 2 weeks before they even said anything.
Mm-hmm.
He fought with the city for workman's comp. They did everything they could to cover it up. Subsequently, we had to sue for the coroner's report. We had to go to the city council and fight them for the police report. And Nancy O'Malley said it was justified when it was not justified. And that is it's just one thing after the other. And as you see, we didn't have a video because they still haven't given us Alan's property. We've never seen any video footage. They've kept that away. And the thing about it is, what I want to say is, had I did see video, I might not be here today, because it is absolutely devastating for someone to steal your son in the middle of the night. I mean, and not tell you and keep him away from his mother. And as George Floyd called for his mother, I don't know if my son was calling for his mother, which he probably was. He had just called his father, and his father said, come on home. He said, Dad, I'm on my way. I'm waiting for the girls to come give me a ride. He was never made it home that night. My husband and I, Alan Bluford, we walked the stage for Alan, receiving his high school diploma. Alan did not deserve this. I believe that the police department, had they been more thorough, they would have got to the bottom and knew that Officer Masso was a repeated offender in the state of New York. He beat and denied an inmate medical treatment. When the city of New York filed charges against him, he left and went to Oakland, and 6 months later, he killed my Alan. And not only that, they left him.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna just interject for a moment, because I wanna hear how you've turned this pain into action, and what you're doing to keep Alan's memory alive. But we're gonna take a short break on the air, go over to our Facebook Live platform, and continue our conversation there. We'll be right back.
Thank you. Thank you. Justice for Alan Bluford.
Yes.
Geraldine, I'm a mom as well, and to hear you tell that story, it's unimaginable, that pain. But I do want to ask you afterwards, and I know your fight for justice was long and it was painful, but in the end, I think the DA's office determined the shooting was justified. That's their conclusion. The officer was disciplined, though, right? And then he later left the force, as you mentioned. And you settled with the city of Oakland, correct? And
yes, we did settle with the city of Oakland.
But so tell me, after that, how did you work toward reform to make sure that some systematic changes were made within the policing area in Oakland?
Well, we got together working with the community. We got together working with other families such as ours. We developed the Alan Bluford Center for Justice at 2434 Telegraph. It's a place to help heal the community. We work with mothers to give them comfort. We designed a platform on what to do if something like this happens to you, to never take the word of someone else, to always do your own investigation, make sure you have your own representative. We went all around speaking about the injustices. We do a lot of outreach every year for Alan's birthday. We give a toy drive for children who's lost their loved ones. We support the sports programs in schools. We do academic scholarships. We every year we give groceries to the families who's lost their loved ones. There's a way to do to get things better. And with our family, it was working with others that helped us heal. So as I got into the community work, I am now a chaplain, and I help people find their spiritual leadership. I also go around with other mothers who don't know how to connect with their pain, and we try to find justice for them as well. So the center is a place to help heal the community. We do awareness. We have workshops. We do things through art for healing. A lot of the children who know Alan, who are trying to find solace because there's a lot of sadness and no hope in Oakland. I must admit that
Online?
it's okay to stand up, it's okay to speak up, but to tear up is one thing. But you have to understand the pain of the community. When you do everything you're supposed to do, we met with the mayor, we met with the police chief, we listened to their lives, we listened to their story, and I understand the pain of the people. And still today, we found out at OPD, they are not keeping the numbers of the misconduct of the police, the people who are turning off their cameras. And I'm working on a bill called the Allen's bill, that any police officer that impedes the function of this lapel camera or turns it off must be prosecuted, and their pension forfeited and give it to the family of the life that they took.
So I want to ask you, though, do you have any concerns with defunding police in the sense that if it goes to community groups that works towards positive change, everybody supports that. But in the meantime, is there some worry that public safety might be endangered in some way if there are fewer police out on the streets, or perhaps less training, perhaps due to less funding of police departments? Is that something that you think can be done immediately, or is that something that needs to be step by step?
I think that the funding can be budgeted in a way where police can get the proper treatment. See, I mean, they can get the proper training. It has to start in the academy. I think when you come out of the academy, you need to work within the community where you're going to be working before you become and take that oath, because the oath is to protect and serve, not shoot to kill. And I feel that if some of the money is budgeted to the libraries, to the schools, it's unheard of that in the city of Oakland, students have to share one textbook. It's unheard of that the hours of the libraries are closed. It's unheard of, yes, we need organization, we need proper protection in our cities, but at the same time, the police do not need to rack up countless hours of overtime when they're just taking the money and doing whatever. That money could be budgeted in a way where it can help the community.
All right, Alan Bluford, you lost your son in 2012 at the age of 18. Alan Bluford, you now have a foundation for him.
Yes.
In his name and doing good work. I appreciate your time, and this defunding police conversation will be continuing in the weeks and months to come, so we welcome you to be a part of it. However you stand on the issue, the different opinions need to be heard. All right, thank you. We're going to take a short break on the air, and when we come back, it's the photo you've seen, I'm sure. It's been seen around the world. We'll talk to the Bay Area doctor who took this photo, hear his message 1 month later as more travelers get on planes and more people join protests. All right. Hey, Facebook friends, thank you for joining today. Our first half of the show was devoted to San Francisco's big announcement that they will be diverting money from the police department to community groups that serve African-American groups in the city to try to equal the playing field and change from the root cause some of the things that lead to some of the other things that we're seeing right now that that have not been I guess, without pain to a whole lot of people. And everybody feels it, but everybody has a different opinion on how to change it and how to effect change in the most positive way. And that is where the debate is. So on this show, as you know, we have the debates. We hear from different sides. And we hope that the different sides could eventually become one side as we all start to hear each other out and truly begin to understand. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Next, I'm looking forward to this. We have UCSF Dr. Ethan Weiss. Just checking in real quick. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right. What is that sign next to you that I see just on your right side there? What does it say?
Yeah, let me move that. My kids went to the protest yesterday or the day before, whatever the one at Mission High School one.
Oh, I mean, you didn't have to move it. That's great. I want to see their sign. All
well,
that's great.
You can leave it.
Right.
I don't want to be too political here, so let me.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Although, you know what? Health should never be political. I don't know.
No, it shouldn't. I don't even know what the other side said. Let me see this.
Back in 20 seconds. All right.
Leave that one. That's
All
better.
right, folks, we're coming back on air. 10 seconds. Oh, nice. All right, you ready to go? Back in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds. And we are back. Now, you might have heard today that American Airlines is boosting flights 74% in July, offering 4,000 flights compared to the 2,300 this month. This is the most aggressive signal yet that travelers freed from shelter-in-place orders are taking to the skies more quickly than expected. So our next guest has a warning about this. He's a UCSF cardiologist, Dr. Ethan Weiss. Dr. Weiss, how are you doing? Good to see you. Can you hear me? You might have to unmute or something. I think you're currently muted. We can no longer hear you. Let's try to get this up. That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So in case our audience is wondering, why is a cardiologist here to talk about disease transmission while flying? Well, the reason is, Dr. Weiss, you took this photo that we want to show people that went viral about a month ago. You were on a United flight back to San Francisco after spending 2 weeks volunteering in a New York City hospital treating COVID patients. What did you see when you boarded that flight?
A lot of people, more people than I thought I was going to see, I guess.
Every seat packed, filled, middle seats, everything?
I mean, I maybe counted a handful of seats that were empty, but yeah, pretty much every seat was full.
Okay, and you tweeted something. What was that you said about the lack of social distancing there?
Well, I think I said something snarky, like I guess United has relaxed their social distancing policy.
I know you spent the 2 previous weeks working in a New York hospital during the peak of the pandemic treating COVID patients, but did this scare you just as much?
I mean, it was unusual. It was unexpected when we flew out to the 2 weeks earlier. The flight was much less full, and so I think it was just unexpected. No one had told us there were going to be people in the middle seats, and so I think it was really just about
right. You were expecting an empty flight, right? But did everybody at least keep their masks on throughout the flight?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't like going through the cabin checking on everybody, but it did look like people had their masks on most of the time.
Okay. I mean, this conversation is timely because air travel is picking up again, and even though airlines have taken more measures since your flight, perhaps in part because of your tweet, you know, they're saying they're requiring masks or they will do their best to avoid booking the middle seat. But we see a lot of pictures on social media still showing that's not happening. So I guess my question is, how concerned are you about summer flying picking up? And then what would you advise travelers?
Well, I want to be careful because I'm certainly not an expert in travel. I can tell you what I would do with my family, and I think I said it in the the Twitter thread that I posted that day. I probably won't take a vacation that would involve getting on an airplane for a little while. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't get on an airplane. If I needed to get on an airplane for an important reason, I would. And I think it can be done safely. And I think it's to be determined yet how risky it is. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure how much of a difference it makes having the flight be 2/3 full versus completely full. But I personally don't want to get on an airplane now. But I'm also more conservative when it comes to things like this and don't want to go get in a crowded restaurant either.
Well, I mean, you have reason to be because you've seen what COVID does to people. Now, in the past week, we've seen Americans, of course, packing not on airplanes, but onto the streets to protest George Floyd's death. What advice do you have for people going to protest? I know you have your colleague put together some bullet points that you thought were very useful.
Yeah, I thought that they did a great job putting together a very comprehensive list of things that they recommend for people to do. And really, it's sort of common sense stuff that we've all learned now, for the most part, about what you're going to do if you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be around a lot of other people. I think to the extent that you can, you want to maintain as much distance as you can. Obviously, we see these protests. It's hard to maintain 6 feet of distance when you're packed in there with a bunch of other people. But I think the most important thing that we all can do is that everybody can wear a mask. And what I think I told you my 2 teenage daughters and my wife went to the protest at Mission High School the other day, and they said that pretty much everybody was wearing masks, and people were handing out masks to those who weren't wearing them. So I was comforted and reassured by that.
Yeah, those were 2 of the points, of course, wear a mask and also carry masks for others. But one that I hadn't thought of before was find an alternative noisemaker, like instead of shouting and screaming, which I guess that could promote transmission, find a drum or something.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this now. These super spreading events tend to happen in places where there's a lot of droplet production. So we've heard about the choir practice in churches and sporting events, other places where you're going to be making a lot of droplets. So obviously chanting and cheering loudly wouldn't be ideal. Now, realistically, if you're at a protest, I don't know how likely it is to convince people not to want to chant and cheer, but I did like the idea of like maybe do some drumming instead.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Hey, so you're a cardiologist, and it's well documented that African Americans have a much higher risk of dying due to heart disease. Can you talk about the size of the disparity and what are the factors that produce that disparity?
Well, I don't think we do. We know the factors. That there's colleagues of mine here working on that now through the Centers for Vulnerable Populations and other organizations here at UCSF, and I think it's a really important question. I think how much of it has to do with racial and ethnic things versus socioeconomic things is to be determined. It's definitely not an area of expertise of mine, but it's something I think that's more important than ever for us to sort out.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think the medical community, yourself included, can do in the fight for more health equity?
Well, I mean, the first thing to do is to acknowledge that it's absolutely necessary that we prioritize it. I think it's something that's become, well, put it this way, I had never heard of it before. I'd never heard of the term health equity before a few years ago. So I think already it's become part of the lexicon at major academic medical centers and universities. And I think it's becoming something that's receiving a significant amount of funding and attention. People now come here to train in an area like this, and there are leaders. And so I think it's something that's become a priority of not just our institution, but other institutions like ours. I think that's important.
All right, I think we're just about out of time, but you know what? I'm going to lay out one more question, and hopefully folks can follow us over onto our live streams to watch. I want to find out if United reached out to you after that picture you posted. But thank you. Thank you so much for your insight into health equity and what the medical community can do, and also protest safety, and of course, flight safety as more and more people take to the skies. All right, we're going to take a short break on the air. All right, Dr. Weiss, I'm going to let you go after one last question, and that is, did United reach out to you to try to have a conversation about your experience?
They did. They reached out to me and told me that they were going to change their policy. And I think what they said was that they were going to be more transparent about what they told customers. That is, they're going to give people some advanced warning that the flight's going to be more full than they had advertised, and that they'll give people an opportunity to rebook their flight if they're not comfortable getting on a flight with more than, however many people and people in the middle seat. So I thought that was a good step. And that to me was the most important thing, was just linking up expectations with what happened in reality.
Now, some of our viewers know that before you went to New York, before that famous flight now, you talked with our reporter Kate Larson, who followed you as your team went out to New York to help during the middle of the COVID, the hardest hit part of their pandemic in New York City. Tell me what your takeaway was from that, and how that might apply to how we treat COVID as we start to reopen here.
Sure. I mean, that was a life-altering experience for me in a number of ways. And I think, I've been doing medicine in some form now for almost 30 years. I started medical school in 1991, and I've never seen anything quite like what I saw in New York City. This disease is brutal. And at least the form of it that I was seeing in New York a few weeks ago was something that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It was absolutely horrific. Took over the entire city, obviously took over all the hospitals, took over every single ward, became an ICU, and it was overwhelming. And it's just a disease that's just horrible for so many reasons. But one of the worst reasons about it is that it affects multiple people in the same family. It tends to, I mean, I've never seen a disease before where you'll find 2 or 3 or 4 people in the same family get critically ill and sometimes even die from the same disease at the same time. Right.
No, that's why people still need to take shelter in place and very seriously. And if you think you might have been exposed, you got to keep quarantining. Dr. Weiss, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you. Take good care.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of our show, Getting Answers. It's an interactive show, and what makes this show different is that we keep the conversation going on our live streams while we take a commercial break on air. Now, if you were watching on television, then you saw earlier Alan Bluford, Oakland mom who lost her son, continuing to talk about police reform and use of force as we came back on air. I know it may have been just a little bit jarring, but I didn't want to interrupt her as she was sharing something very personal and very meaningful to her after losing her son, Alan. But that, again, is what makes the show different. The conversation never stops, so we're glad you're here. We're here every day at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. See you on Monday.
And we're clear.
right. Goodbye, Facebook friends. Thank you for watching today. Take care. Have a good weekend.